Okay, good evening, and thank you for joining today's session from Pennsylvania State Association of Township Commissioners. We will be focusing on Housing Action Plan with Morgan Boyd from Pennsylvania Department of Community and Economic Development. This session is recorded for others to watch later because a lot of people couldn't join today. And the agenda covers some of the forecast. Morgan has, I've discussed with Morgan in the past, he has a massive amounts of data and analysis that DCED has done. So it'll be exciting to hear directly from him. And there are some grants and other financial opportunities for local communities and municipalities to tap into. So we'll hear a little bit about that. And then we will also talk about some of the bills, those are in flight right now. Matter of fact, last week was our PSATC annual lobby day. We were able to go into the housing law and bills, and we were able to influence some of the bills, specifically around the auxiliary dwelling unit on houses. So, we'll touch a little bit about that. And then besides that, I think, Morgan, over to you.
Yeah, sounds good. First of all, thank you for the opportunity to come talk with you guys today. I really appreciate the engagement from you, Alec, and from the Association of Township Commissioners. It's so critical as we're working to solve this issue, and it is a monumental issue that we have partnership, at the state level, from local governments, from our developers, from our advocates and nonprofit communities. Like this is an issue that's going to take a whole of everybody approach to solving. It's an issue that like the state can't tackle alone. It's an issue municipalities, aren't resourced to tackle alone. It's an issue that the developers and our friends in the nonprofit sector aren't able to tackle alone. It really is going to take all of us. So thank you for your engagement on this. I suppose jumping into the issue itself, when the Shapiro administration first came online in 2023. One of the first things that Governor Shapiro tasked my boss, Secretary Siger, with completing was the development of Pennsylvania's first economic development strategy in 20 years. And so we spent the majority of 2023 going around to communities, talking with municipal leaders, talking with business leaders, analyzing all types of data on economic development to pull together that strategy. And you can see here the five different portions, five different sections of that strategy. And across every region, we heard many of the things that you would expect us to hear, right? We heard a need to invest in commercial industrial sites. We heard a need to deploy more resources to our main streets. We heard a need to streamline permitting processes, make it easier for folks to come in and do business in Pennsylvania, whether they're dealing with DEP permits, DOT permits, or other permits found at the state level. But one of the things that we heard across every region that maybe we weren't expecting to hear as loudly as was presented was the need to focus on housing as a core driver of economic development. Whether we were in Erie, whether we were in St. Mary's, whether we were in Wyoming County, Center City, Philadelphia, across the state, it was clear that folks had a focus on building more housing as a way to unlock their community's true potential, as a way to secure and sustain jobs and economic development, and as a way to build vibrant communities. And so we incorporated that as one of the 19 initiatives associated with the economic development strategy. You can see the initiative's verbiage here, but what it basically amounted to was no government study is complete without a pin to do another study. This was that other study, and that other study eventually became the Housing Action Plan as was released back in February. So to develop the plan, I guess starting out, as we were doing that process, like DHS was out in the field talking with their stakeholders, Department of Military and Veterans Affairs talking with their stakeholders, Department of Aging going around the state talking with senior care providers and with seniors. And all of these different partners from a different variety of angles were receiving feedback that like we need to focus on housing in addition to DCED. And so the governor took this feedback and on September 12th, 2024, issued Executive Order 2024-03, instructing the administration to pull together Pennsylvania's first ever housing action plan. And the goal here was to create a comprehensive approach to housing, right? We didn't just want to focus on one element of housing. Like we didn't just want to focus on building more units. We didn't just want to focus on alleviating issues of homelessness. We wanted to make sure that we were bringing state government together and bringing folks together to create a whole approach, a comprehensive approach to solving our identifying and solving our housing challenges. And so to develop a plan, we held 15 regional roundtables all across Pennsylvania. We have put out a survey, solicited survey responses, received about 2,500 responses statewide. By the way, compared to the survey we put out for the economic development strategy, that survey received 300 responses statewide. So you can see the magnitude of folks interested in housing. Analyzed the current state of the Pennsylvania housing market, projected future trends, and reviewed 56 other programs put into place, housing programs put into place by states all across the United States. And the result is the Housing Action Plan itself, 5 goals, 28 initiatives, and you can view the plan online. We're going to go over some of those goals and initiatives today, and then I'm always available if something that you want to discuss in more detail isn't brought up today. You're certainly always welcome to reach out or give me a call. So here you can see the 5 overarching areas of focus for the housing strategy. Number 1, building and preserving Pennsylvania's housing stock. Pretty self-intuitive, intuitive there. What can we do from a resource standpoint to build more units as well as preserve the units that we have? Pennsylvania is an old state. We have some of the oldest housing stock in the nation. We know that just as important as it is to increase our build rates, it's as important to ensure that the stock that we do have remains in good repair. Point number 2, expanding housing opportunity. It's not just enough to build and preserve units. We have to make sure that folks have access to those units. This section focuses on ensuring that. Providing pathways to housing stabilization and sustainability really is targeted at our vulnerable at-risk residents, working to alleviate homelessness, working to alleviate the distinct housing challenges that certain vulnerable populations may have. Modernizing our development regulations. It's not just enough for the state to increase its spending on housing. We also have to take a hard look at the different development regulations governing housing, both at the state level in terms of the construction code, in terms of certain environmental regulations, certain energy regulations, et cetera, and in terms of local governance, the structure that we have put in place with the municipalities planning code. How can we optimize that to drive better housing outcomes? And then 5, achieving operational excellence across state and local government. This is like taking a hard look at how we're structured internally as a state and ensuring that structure is appropriate to effectively drive out housing programs and drive out results. This is like opening up the hood of the car and making sure that the engine and all the parts associated with the engine are working well and cohesively. I just want to touch on a couple initiatives in each section. Again, I'm not going to go into all initiatives or we'd be here well into the night. But first and foremost on building and preserving units, a couple stats here. We found we need to build 450,000 new housing units by 2035 to meet our projected demand. We're currently projected to fall short based on our current build rates by 185,000 units. That means in order to fully meet our demand, we need to increase our build rate across the state by about 70%. On top of that, we know that, again, Pennsylvania's housing stock is old. 54% of all housing units in the state were built before 1970, over 50 years old. 1.4 million units built before 1940. We need to preserve the stock that we do have. It's a hell of a lot less expensive to just fix a roof than it is to stand up an entirely new unit. So just to touch on 2 discrete goals in this section. Number 1, we need to invest in residential site infrastructure and mixed-use development. And by that, I mean the Commonwealth is working currently right now, we'll get into this a little bit later in the presentation, to capitalize a $1 billion critical infrastructure investment fund. The lion's share, in the governor's words, of that fund, if we're successful in securing those dollars, will go towards housing, both to help subsidize the construction of new housing, as well as to recapitalize some of the housing restoration programs the counties have in place throughout the state. And then number 2, boosting the production of housing where market dynamics make it difficult to build. We know that in a large portion of the Commonwealth, and we know we have a need to build housing units everywhere, right? Like the Philadelphia region, just naturally by the numbers, has the highest need to build. But regardless of where you're at, like if you're in the north central part of the state or the southern Alleghenies, right? Areas where population may be, maintaining or even declining in some instances. Like even those regions, there's a need to build more units. A lot of those regions you can't build units for a price at what's the construction cost of the unit meets the market price, the sales price, or the rental rate of the unit, which in turn disincentivizes investment into the creation of new housing stock. We will be working not in this budget, but in future years to stand up a program, likely a tax credit program that gaps the equity necessary to allow for developers to build units and to sell those units at a reasonable profit in areas where the market dynamics just make it so that's not possible. Expanding access to housing, expanding housing opportunity. 2 points to touch on here. National share of first-time homebuyers has fallen from 33% of home sales to less than 25% of home sales in 2024. It's fallen even further. The National Association of Realtors came out with 2025 figures that percentage continues to decline. And 35,000 properties across the Commonwealth currently have tangled titles, which is prohibitive to heirs from accessing, from officially owning those properties, tapping into home equity, building generational wealth. We know that roughly $900 million in property valuation is tied up. Their tangles are titled, with folks unable to gain access to those titles. So 2 points here. The plan includes, number one, making it easier for Pennsylvanians to purchase their first home. The state's going to look to stand up its first dedicated first-time home buyer fund to allow for additional dollars to flow to first-time home buyers in the form of down payment and closing cost assistance, and in the form of mortgage interest rate point buy downs to make sure that folks both have the upfront capital to secure a house and are able to sustain mortgage payments over the long term to ensure that they can just, not just access the house, but remain in the unit over the long haul. We're also looking at expanding local tools to capitalize these types of funds, including, and I'll just use a county example as a recovering county commissioner. This is most familiar to me. Looking at uncapping or increasing the cap on county optional affordable housing funds, which many counties currently use right now to capitalize their own first-time home buyer incentives. Those caps are stuck in 1993. State law prohibits counties to increase those caps beyond their 1993 levy. We're looking at least, increasing or potentially uncapping that to allow for counties to expand those resources. And then preventing and remediating tangled titles. The governor is proposing in his budget authorizing transfer on death deeds, which enables folks to circumvent the probate process and pass their homes directly through to the next generation after they have passed. Our hope is that will alleviate going forward many of the issues associated with tangled titles just by getting folks around that probate process. And for folks currently stuck in the muck in probate, looking at increasing legal supports to ensure that they can get those 35,000 existing tangled titles untangled. Ensuring that our most vulnerable and at-risk residents have access to housing. In 2024, 14,000 Pennsylvanians experiencing homelessness on a single night, an increase of 12% compared to 2023. A data point to note here is that's roughly 1,000 more individuals across the Commonwealth than in 2023. So like 13,000 in 23, 14,000 in 24. But the key distinction here is that almost all of that increase is attributable to unsheltered homelessness, right? The number of beds that we have for both emergency shelter and transitional housing is not increasing at the rate that it needs to ensure that we can get these folks off the streets and under a roof. We know that that's a focus area that we need to dial in on. And then also 120,000 evictions filed or foreclosure actions taken against Pennsylvania households in 2024. That amounts to about 2% of all households across the Commonwealth facing either an eviction action or a foreclosure filing. The 2 points to touch on here. Number one, connecting unsheltered Medicaid recipients to stable housing. We have in Pennsylvania what's called an 1115 waiver. The Department of Human Services have what's called an 1115 waiver, which enables us to flex Medicaid funding to deploy to ensure that we can get folks who are experiencing homelessness access to short-term rental support, access to dollars to purchase basic household items such as a bed, kitchen materials, toiletries, and as well as surround those individuals with wraparound supports to ensure that once we get them under a roof, that they can then move seamlessly to transitional housing and continue to progress upward in terms of economic and social mobility. The governor right now is proposing a $1 million pilot investment into this, which federalizes once you combine state Medicaid dollars with federal Medicaid dollars, federalizes to about 2.5 million in total increased spend. The important thing to note here is that while we are proposing to increase Medicaid spending to allow for these new types of programs to be structured, our thesis is that in getting folks access to a roof, we will mitigate downstream negative health impacts that would otherwise also be absorbed by the Medicaid system and which cost a hell of a lot more in terms of providing medical support than providing for short-term rental assistance to get folks access to that roof and prevent those long-term negative health impacts that might cause more hospital stays or doctor visits. And then number two, expanding statewide eviction and foreclosure programs, looking at, for example, requiring a period of mandatory mediation at a time between a landlord may consider evicting one of their tenants, requiring mediation for a period of 30 days before that eviction happens. Also looking, again, expanding legal supports for individuals for whom eviction has been filed against to ensure that their legal rights are respected if they so choose to fight that eviction in a court of law.
Hey, Morgan, can I ask a question there? On that, like, so the medical programs, it's an interesting aspect. You said the Medicare program, it's a logical concept, but I think for some reason I always thought that the federal government kind of gives a lot of money of that, a lot of portion of that money, right? So how does the state benefit by doing that program where state is putting money into housing, through Medicare? Shouldn't that be a federal problem or a federal government's initiative?
So the state is a majority of our Medicaid spending does come from the Fed. The state, though, is required to match a certain portion of that spending. And so, to your point, yes, if we're successful in reducing our overall Medicaid costs, the bulk of that benefit will be accrued to the federal level, but it will still at the same time reduce state matching commitments that we are required to put forward for any recipient of Medicaid in Pennsylvania. It's a shared program. The bulk is federal, but it is a shared program with the state.
Thank you.
Yep. Regulatory, 25 to 30% of the construction cost of a single family unit is attributable to some form of government regulation, both at the state level and at the local level. That percentage increased to 40% and more when you start getting into new multifamily builds or conversions. And there are 39 land banks in Pennsylvania that are currently constrained from realizing their potential. We know we need to update the regulatory regime associated with land banks as well. The 2 points here. Number one, we're going to, over the course of the next year, take a hard look at all of the different construction and development regulations that govern residential development in Pennsylvania, both at the state level and at the local level. That includes the construction code, that includes our septic regulations, our MPDES regulations, certain other environmental regs. It also includes looking at local processes and the way that local governments are able to structure and regulate housing development. Again, in collaboration with the folks on this call, in collaboration with local government organizations, to see where we can improve on our ability to deliver homes for Pennsylvanians, again, both at the state and local regulatory levels. And then number two, strengthening the ability of land banks to return properties to productive use. This is updating many of the regulations associated with land banks. So, for example, right now, redevelopment authorities have indemnity from environmental liability, extending that indemnity to cover land banks. Looking at when a land bank acquires a property that may have a state inheritance tax lien, allowing the land bank to waive that inheritance tax lien to return that property back to productive use. Also means looking at expanding some of the local funding sources that can be used to cover land bank operations to ensure that those land banks are staffed appropriately and have the resources that they need to perform their mission. And then lastly, last section, optimizing the machine. You can see here a chart showing all the different state agencies that are responsible at some level for some type of housing something, whether that's on the development side, whether that's on the civil rights side, whether that is on the regulatory side. You can see that we have a lot of different agencies responsible for a lot of different housing functions. And sometimes those agencies, you may be surprised to learn, don't run in tandem with each other. Their goals may, I don't want to say they're going in opposite directions, but in certain instances, the goals are maybe misaligned between different agencies. And it's hard for folks to access and navigate all the different programs and regulations and approvals, that the state agencies are responsible for. So two things here. Number one, we are in the process right now. We actually held final round interviews last week. I think the last one's wrapped up on Wednesday. Of appointing a deputy secretary for housing and creating a dedicated deputate at the Department of Community and Economic Development that will oversee both the implementation of this plan as well as all the different government, state government programs, policies, regulatory, et cetera, associated with housing. So we're in the process of hiring for that right now. This individual will sit on the PHFA board and really, take ownership over all the different housing programs and housing challenges that are presented before the state today. We're also going to look to spin up a digital one-stop shop. The average resident does not care where a program or where a support system is housed in state government, like whether it's at DCED, whether it's at L&I in terms of construction code, whether it's a DEP in terms of pulling a permit, DHS or aging in terms of a supportive system. Like they just want to access the programs. And so we're going to basically pull together a digital front door that consolidates, that makes it super easy for folks to both look at all the different programs and housing functions that the state oversees and access those programs, supportive structures as they may need to. So quickly, I just want to touch on the budget, and then I'll turn it back over to Alec to guide maybe our discussion or go over any other points you guys might want to address. First and foremost, Governor's proposing a $1 billion investment into critical infrastructure as part of the budget. This includes the lion's share, again, going towards housing development and restoration. We're proposing a $1 million investment in health pilot program. This is that Medicaid program to prove out that thesis, to test in a couple of limited markets and to prove out that theory. And if we're successful in both getting folks access to shelter and in reducing overall Medicaid health expenditures, I would imagine that in future years we will look to expand that pilot. But we want to pilot that first, prove it out, and see what the results are before going full scale into that form of Medicaid expansion. And a number of policy initiatives and reforms, mostly focused on renter protections, tenant protections. So, looking at sealing eviction records for individuals who might not have otherwise been evicted, looking at enacting fair chance housing reform, proposing to enable survivors of domestic violence to break leases without penalty and escape bad situations, authorizing transfer on death deeds, capping lot rent increases in manufactured home communities, all of these different measures to provide new protections for Pennsylvanians to ensure that folks can remain in the home that they call home. And then lastly, we're starting the process. The deputy secretary, once we onboard them, is going to start the process of reviewing all of the different local planning, zoning, all the different state regulations, et cetera, that go into new housing development. And again, look for areas that we can modernize, scale back, improve upon the regulatory framework that governs housing construction, and ultimately reduce barriers to getting more units stood up across the Commonwealth. I want to emphasize that's a process that has not yet started. Again, we're waiting to onboard that deputy secretary for housing. They will start that process in earnest here probably in June or July of this year after they have a chance to come on board. And as a part of that process, I just want to state unequivocally, because I know this is probably the area that raises the most eyebrows from township commissioners, supervisors, borough council members, county commissioners, et cetera, that we will be engaging local government organizations and local governments as we look to kind of go through, the MPC as well as the different regulations at the state level. So that's all I have for you in terms of presentation. Housing action plans available on our website. You can see the speaker information. Just email me. It's the easiest way to get through. My email is moboyd at pa.gov. I think it's on this Zoom link. Thank you again for your interest in this, and I'll turn it back over to Alec.
Thank you, Martin. This is such an amazing plan and overview. So many things happening, I didn't know that you presented like what, 7 or 8 different agencies responsible for some sort of housing. I didn't know that there were that many agencies responsible for housing. It's very interesting. And then one of the in your initial slide, you said there were 45 regional meetings or roundtables happened, right?
15.
So 15.
Yep.
Okay, so does that mean Pennsylvania has 15 different regions on the plans, or how do you how did you decide that?
So DCED has 6 regions that we have basically carved the state up to for administrative purposes. So, like, Alec, you would be in the Lehigh Valley, which would be Fadia Halma's district. I'm sitting in Pittsburgh right now, which would be John Pro's district from a regional directive perspective. And so we used those administrative regions basically as organizing functions. We held at least 2 roundtables in every region, held an additional roundtable just based on the number of stakeholders in the city of Pittsburgh, in the city of Philadelphia, and in the city of Harrisburg to ensure that we got to advocates, developers, local governments, et cetera, made sure that everybody had an opportunity to be present at one of those roundtables.
Nice, thank you.
Yep.
So like those roundtables, it looks like they're already completed, right? So when you
Yep.
did the plan, yeah. So we were like looking at different bills. I'll let Liz from Upper Gwinnett Township she can kind of explain a little bit more about different things. These are all great ideas. Definitely, we have a problem and stuff. But what we found at a high level, a lot of these, as you said, some of them are state level rules, some of them are local level rules, and then how do we solve that together? So we have, of course, in first class townships, we have a zoning authority in most townships. I don't think, I mean, that's a requirement for first class township code. So majority of the townships have a zoning authority. So and then when we were looking at the state level rules, some of them are kind of like trumping over zoning authorities' rights on today what they would be allowing and not allowing and stuff. So that's where we were like, okay, it's a great plan to solve some of the problem, but we could also see at ground level that could invite problems for somebody who wants to exploit loopholes in that opportunity. And then, how do we partner together to form policies that's going to still allow the zoning and other types of framework that we have in first class township to uphold some of these construction rights and neighbor rights and construction codes and other types of things. So we're looking at it, but I'll let Liz kind of explain some of the examples so that you can hear what we were trying to talk here.
Hi. So we were in Harrisburg this time last week, right? Yeah.
It was Monday. Yeah, this time
Yeah.
with the House of Representatives. Yes.
Yeah. And so I sat in on the Housing and Development Committee that met. Never sat in on one before. That was fun.
Yeah, they are. They can be.
Oh my. So one of the bills that I've been watching, well, first of all, I should say, here in Upper Gwinnett, which is in Montgomery County, we just approved last November, and it was a battle for workforce housing. So we're going to be, they're actually started, I think they started the end of March to break ground for a 60 unit a tax credit based, it's a group out of New Jersey. So they knew what they were doing with all of this. But the first problem that we had here was that on the parcel of land, which it wasn't spot zoning, we continued it to be a transit oriented district. So we extended that because it's near the train stations and near a major bus line. So we changed the zoning, the development came in, but the first obstacle that they had, Morgan, was there was homeless people on the land that they want to build. They were unsheltered. There were 18 of them. So we worked with some groups in Montgomery County. Access Services took the lead on this, and they were able to get it started with social workers coming in. And there was, I forget the name of the program that they were modeling after, but they had grant money. And they went in and it was very important to us in Upper Gwinnett, to our board, that it be done with compassion and empathy. And we just didn't want to move the unsheltered across the way into Lansdale Borough. We didn't want to do that. So anyway, so they came in and everything, they brought the medical van in, to the medical aid van, got the help that they needed, asked everybody what they need, did it right. So out of the 18 that we had, I think there's 4 left. So they were just shifted slightly, but they were the ones that, you can only do so much. You can take a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. So I was okay with that. So so we have affordable housing. We've got this going on. I think it's a great plan. We did take a beating. So any other commissioners out there, we did. It wasn't easy, but I'm a mom of 3 boys. So when the one guy told me to meet him in the parking lot after a meeting, I was like, okay, have you met my boys? No. We had a lot of support and a lot of, it was tough. Anyway, we got that done, but we're still not done here. There's still other things, like you said, with Josh, with the governor's housing plan that we can do. I did like the policy reform. There was a lot there that I agree with eviction and things like that. That can be done. And when you showed all the different organizations, I knew there were a lot out there, but that's really great, because it does all can circle back to how we work together to address this. One of the bills was House Bill that I sat in on was House Bill 2186. And that had to do with accessory dwelling units. And basically what they said was they're by right. They can go anywhere. And local municipalities have no control over that. They can go. And that will not fly anywhere, I think, across the state. We can't. And local municipalities need to still keep some control with that. So there were amendments to that bill that we're okay with. It's a good start. Like one of them was that the owner has to live either in the house or in the ADU. It just can't be, because then it could turn into short-term rentals. So it was things like that. And one part, like there was nothing for parking. But if you don't live within a certain radius, I think it was 1.5 miles of public transportation, you have to provide 1 parking spot. The AUDs would still be, ADUs would still be hooked up to the main house and their electric and water and all that. But if it puts a strain on the infrastructure, so there was definitely some good tweaks made to it, but it still needs work, because I don't think PSATC is yet to put their stamp of approval on it. The other one was House Bill 2109, which dealt with the Golden Girls law, about how many unrelated people can live together. And I think, again, that needs to be still in control of each municipality. For example, we had the Gwinnett Mercy University boys basketball team living in a house that was rented for them in a residential neighborhood. Not good. Not good at all. Another thing
Liz, that one, I didn't mean to interrupt, Liz, and I just remember that one. In our township, we had that topic brought up to us by residents, and we did a workshop. I remember, I forgot if we ever did any bills around that, but we did a workshop with residents and all the commissioners and all of our people involved to see what that means. They're like, oh, your last names have to match, mismatch, this, that. There was all kinds of discussion. I remember we had that in our township. So very interesting.
It's the definition of family, and it's not what it was. And so there are things like in this workforce housing, they use 2 people per bedroom for occupancy. So that makes sense. Here in Upper Gwinnett, we use how many definition of family is how many people share the same cooking area. So how many people share the same kitchen, and we have our fire safety rules and all that in place. But that was one too, and I know there were some amendments to that one too. I don't have them off the top of my head, but again, allowing that to be so open-ended was not one that we were very supportive of.
So,
um,
here's what I would say sort of on both of those. And by the way, I'll touch on, I think the administration right now as it stands is like generally okay with the Golden Girls one.
mhm,
I think the ADUs one, that does need to be a little bit more work done on that one. I don't think we're prepared to articulate, as an administration, whether we would support, oppose, or be neutral on that specific bill as it currently stands. Um, as it currently stands. I will say just on the ADU bill, because I've had a lot more discussions on that one than I have the Golden Girls one's like a lot more straightforward than the ADU. So we've just naturally had more
absolutely.
discussions
Yeah.
on ADUs. But like to your point, in talking with Center County, right, and in talking with the Poconos, there is I think a legitimate concern on ADUs being stood up for the sole purpose of renting them out in the case of Center County, right, for football games. And so, I think that that's something that we're certainly open to, finding a way to address in the language of whatever bill ultimately is promulgated. And so, to your point, like if you have specific recommendations on, areas where we could mitigate some of the concerns that you may have, or language that you might want us to consider inserting into or asking the legislature to insert into that bill, please send that, our way. And we're willing to, we're certainly willing and open to taking feedback and adjusting. I don't think we're probably ever going to get to a point where PSATS is supportive of a bill that relates to some of the stuff that may or may not go forward with local zoning regulations. But again, that doesn't mean we're in any way, want to be adversarial to where legitimate concerns exist, mitigating those concerns.
We just, I'm all for them, because I live in a house with 3 boys in their 20s and they're saving their money to move out. Um, when I say move out, I don't mean in a little tiny house in my backyard.
Yep, sure.
But, they're here, and would I let them live in that workforce housing that we approved? Absolutely. But right now they're where they need to be. I was glad that that the character of the ADU had to kind of resemble what's the character of the neighborhood, because in my mind I was thinking of tarps and a big orange electrical cord, and I know that that's not sorry.
Yeah, not the intent.
No, but I could see people, what is their definition of, an ADU? And so it's that kind of restrictions and things that I like, just so that, and there's not, like you said, there's not going to be a one size fits all, because here in Montgomery County is different than where Aluk is, or, where you are right now out in Pittsburgh. And we're pretty much built out here. So some of the things that I've read about was corner units, corner lots, because they're bigger. Instead of a single family, allow a duplex or a triplex. If we were still growing and had room, that would be something I would think we would be okay with. With parking, right now we have to allow so many parking spaces per unit. I found a lot of municipalities could be flexible on that to allow lesser parking for more density in communities. And that would be another one that I think would be okay with a lot of, from after talking to people around here. And there are some other ones. But I think like pushing the process through, making it a quicker process. I read an article in the New York Times that they had approved a set for ADUs, like 10 different models you can have, and you can just, would that work? Again, I don't know if that would be something like pre-approval of certain units. I guess that would have to be done by each municipality, would have to approve, and pushing along the zoning and cutting the costs of how to go through all that. I don't know if every municipality can afford to do that. I don't know, if that would be a solution.
So that's actually an area that I think that we're going to be able to find compromise. It's still going to be it's going to take some effort to get to that level of like what makes sense for Pennsylvania. But the speed and certainty in permitting to me is of the issues that we have to consider in the MPC, right? To me, that's one that like makes sense to try to work to tackle sooner rather than later. So right now, on average in Pennsylvania, and this is according to the builder, so I'm assuming this is exaggerated like a little bit. It takes 23 months from zoning permit application to shovel in the ground for a single family unit. Let's say that it's greatly exaggerated, it's 15. That's still too long, right, for an individual to wait to get a permit. And so, I think, again, pending that we got on board, we're going to get the deputate spun up. But I think that we'll be able to, on that particular issue, work with you guys, work with the municipal organizations to say, all right, what can we change in the MPC to ensure that, like, you guys still have some level of autonomy over, local zoning regulations, but at the same time that autonomy is exercised in a way that gets folks to a faster yes or a faster no, so that they can hopefully start construction, at a much quicker pace.
I hope that can be worked out, because I agree that is, I think I became a commissioner in 2018, and that was the biggest shock to me, was how slow local government works. It takes a long time to get stuff done.
Yep.
And it still shocks me. So, if like a checklist or a criteria checklist could be made or something like that to make that process easier, I think that would be accepted statewide, maybe.
Yep.
And
Third party engineering is something that I think we could also consider. Whereby if there's a certified engineer that the Commonwealth has signed off on, they've taken all the requisite tests, like they are an engineer with insurance, a stamp, everything, right? Enabling developers to go out and select, their own engineer that is certified by the Commonwealth to complete all the necessary engineering requirements and, provide their seal and certainty that, local requirements are adhered to. Like, that's an area that we've seen implemented in other states, something we may want to consider here. Shock clocks are something that's being implemented in other states where, there's just a certain mandated period of time that folks have to be able to analyze a proposed development and make the decision versus, allowing for potentially an unending review period where, comments are submitted, then changes are made, then more comments are submitted, then more changes are made.
The meetings are canceled because of the weather or because there's no quorum or what. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Exactly. Yep.
It's a long process.
I know. Now that you said that, I'm going to be talking to Kathy, who's our township manager, about what's our average. I'm interested now to know what's our average.
Yeah.
But talking about, so one of the thing, as Liz said, right, it's pretty much all first class townships are pretty much built out. That's a real fact. Not in every single township, but most of the townships are pretty much built out in first class township wise. So the question was, when we're looking at assessing our primarily sewer capacity, water, yes, we can always build it out, but sewer capacity is truly a challenge sometimes. We are all running out of capacity, or there are some lines those are 100 years old in some places, some townships. So when we're allowing these new permits and new things, whether we build new or allow auxiliary units or whatever we allow, that's going to add more load into the sewer lines. So I don't know if there is a way, because that we can't really recoup that from the construction permits as townships, right? Because in our permits only cover really the inspection and whatever purposes. We don't take any permit money towards future development of the infrastructure, right? So I don't know if you guys thought about in Pennsylvania level to give some grants or encourage townships to improve your sewer lines or infrastructure that can prepare your townships better to accept more constructions or something like that.
Yep. So I would say on that, I'd say two things on that front. Number one is that a component of this critical infrastructure investment fund, as it relates to creating new units, an eligible use, I don't want to say will be, because we still have to negotiate all this with the legislature, but will very likely be expanding not just sewage lines, but sewage capacity. we would likely want to tie that to some discrete project, or at least developer interest in doing a discrete project to ensure that like those funds are optimized for deployment across the state. But that is very likely to be a component of the critical infrastructure investment fund.
Now,
The
sorry, please finish your thought, but my question is, if that will come, so we go to DCED for grant, like what that process will look like. Like, let's say somebody's building an 80-unit complex or a 100-unit complex in a township. Now, of course, we are not collecting any money from that developer to go and increase our capacity. Now, with that application, can we, as a township, in your view, go and apply to state, we can approve this construction subject to you give so much in grant towards, infrastructure improvement for sewer lines, let's say. And just a thought about there.
Yeah, so in terms of the process itself, I would envision this particular program being run just like we run any grant program, right? Where we will put out a competitive application. Folks will have the ability to apply for that, whether it's the developer, whether it's, in many cases, we find that just due to tax liability, it's more financially advantageous for local governments or authorities to apply for infrastructure funding, because that way when we give them the grant, like the grant is taxable basis and they don't have to, basically, it doesn't negate the grant if a municipality or an authority takes it on versus if a developer takes it on. But I would envision the process being just like a Main Street Matters or a RACP or a PA Sites, things of that nature. And we'll score, and we will award to the most most competitive projects.
Awesome. Thank you. I would like to park at least a couple minutes towards the end for you to talk about any grant process or opportunities related to this. But I'll definitely let Craig or Kathy ask any question if they have or anything they want to discuss. But here's the thing. To your point, when you said if we have ideas and stuff, we can send to the state to to you guys. We in the last week's lobbying process, we worked with some of the House members and their offices and staff and people, those who are presenting, to push the bill to the floor and all that. We actually saw some of the amendments Liz talked about. We did discuss about that on Monday, and they were added into the amendments, by Thursday. So we saw that fast action. So we're very happy about our visit and the effect. And I think this is probably the fastest speed any amendment I've ever seen to a proposed bill, to be honest, because I think people want speed, as you said. It looks like Governor is very serious about speed on this matter. So I think all of us recognize that. But at the same time, working in a meaningful way that's going to be sustainable is very important and doesn't break anything that we have today. But yeah. I'll let you speak about some of the grant opportunities towards the end, but over to you, Craig and Kathy, if you have any questions or topics you want to discuss or ask.
Yeah, so just to give you a little bit of background, I was just elected in January, so I was also horrified at just how slow everything moves. I should have known that coming from kind of the community advocacy background, but it's still hard to accept. Lower Merion Township is we're currently working on some parsing through some recommendations that were provided by a consultant that we hired last year to provide a housing action plan. So we're working through all that right now. So this is very timely and extremely interesting. So a couple of things that I've been thinking a lot about through this is really the innovations that we're going to need kind of locally in the financial space to help folks who want to convert ADUs. There's just not a product out there, right, to facilitate that. And I see that even if we do all of these other great things, which I hope we will do in Lower Merion, I anticipate that still being a bottleneck when we get to that point. And we're also going to be looking at at upzoning by right in various zones and other strategies as well. But forgive me, I haven't had a chance to in depth read through the state plan yet. I have skimmed it. So this wasn't totally foreign, but is there anything is the state considering anything in that regard for even guidance to municipalities to to kind of get something going with a finance piece?
Yeah, so we're actively engaged with the banks. So like, I talked to two larger banks last week, for example, on different ways we can deploy financing.
Right.
The banks, so I'll start there. The banks are, they're highly at this point regulated entities, but they are willing to get in the game on like new development and new ways to finance products. We are also actively looking at some of the existing programs that we have, specifically the Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency, and how on the public side we can flex some of our funds to allow for, to your point, creative ways to finance or capitalize funds, or otherwise ensure that folks have access to capital to build out new units. And then the last point that I'll add is, we made a very intentional point in the plan. One of the 28 initiatives is supporting small and emerging developers, specifically developers who might be building, their first unit, right? First for sale unit, or taking a blighted piece of property, converting it to a duplex and putting it back to productive use, right? Or, maybe standing up, their first two townhouses, on a parcel that they've acquired. It's not enough just to support the big guys, although it's certainly our intention to do that, right? It's not like Penrose and, Oxford and Pittsburgh and, Basiliga up in,
Ryan Holmes and all those big guys.
yeah, like important, very important, because we need homes en masse. But it's also just as important to ensure that like the little guys who are looking to get into the development game have access to capital to be able to do that, and who can go in and do, in your communities that are built up, scattered site development where necessary, or build up at a lot that might be underutilized, or where the home is old, someone might have taken it down, and there's no, a big guy's not going to come in and build a single unit or a duplex. So we're very intentional about structuring, supports for those types of activities as well.
That's great. I'm really glad to hear that. And you read my mind, because that was my second question.
Yeah.
Specifically, if there's any kind of any thought going on about developing an incremental developer ecosystem, right?
Yep.
Which is something else I've thought a lot about. And then just one other quick question. One thing that did catch my eye when I was skimming through, and I'm very intrigued by it, is the housing ready designation. When would you anticipate specific guidelines would be released for that? I'm super intrigued.
Yeah, I would say so. There's sort of I would consider it like a two-step process on the regulatory side, right? Number one is looking at best practices, analyzing best practices across the nation on like what's working, what's not working. We should be able to do that relatively expeditiously. And the way that like I've started framing up this type of program is, Liz, I think you brought right on the ADU side, you kind of brought this up. Like, here are 20 things you could do, or 10 things that you could do in your zoning that we think, based on what we're seeing in other states and just based on general governance philosophy, can really have a measurable impact on residential. Adopt 6 of them, is sort of how I've started thinking about that. I would anticipate like it's going to take us a little bit of time, and we're the state, so approvals are a pain. But I would say we'd likely have a program out early, maybe late 26, early, quarter 1 27, that folks can come in for and get moving on sort of like that soft incentive. And then, by the way, too, I think it'll be interesting to see if folks opt into that program. If we structure it in a way where like, here's the 10 things, like what are the top 3 that folks are, collectively, like whether it's, Mill Creek outside Erie or the city of Scranton or wherever, like what are the top 3 things that folks who are choosing to opt into that program select? And maybe those are the 3 things that we work to advance. Like maybe that's a way to generate or identify consensus around like these things make the most sense as something to adopt holistically across the state.
So you've probably seen it, but Strong Towns has a framework that is actually, it's very similar to what you described, and they've actually dubbed it housing ready cities.
I,
It's very interesting.
I had drinks with the author
Oh,
of
nice.
Strong Guns. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Cool.
Jumpstart is another one I heard about. I think it was called Jumpstart in the city in Philly. Morgan,
They
just so
actually,
that you know, Craig and I are both Craig. I am gotten friendly with Jeremiah on your board,
Oh, good. Yeah.
and
He's easy to
his
get friendly with. He's a great guy.
wonderful guy. My township and Lower Merion are really kind of taking the lead here in Montgomery County. Lower Merion has a lot of housing for seniors, a lot of affordable housing for seniors.
yep.
Yeah.
And
New one going up right as we speak.
yeah, so
About
they're
a half mile from here.
so that's you've got two of Montgomery County's like top people on here with towns, with wanting to address this with you. So I sent a letter or a text to a look. I tutor under-resourced children. So I have to jump off and get my dog because the little boy I'm reading with tonight loves to read via Zoom to my dog. So
God
I
bless
need
you.
to
That's
jump.
awesome.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
awesome.
everybody
That's a
deserves a
perfect
little.
excuse.
Yes,
That is great. Yeah.
Thank you.
I must jump, but
Certainly get a
thank you,
pass.
Morgan. I'll be in touch. Craig, it was nice meeting you. I hope to see you
Likewise.
soon.
Yeah.
Kathy,
Likewise.
hi, Kathy. And look, I'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you, Liz.
All
We'll
right.
be
Thank
wrapping
you.
up shortly. Thank
Okay.
you. So, Kathy, I didn't know if you have any questions or any topic you wanted to bring up.
Well, I think at least for Salisbury in the last development that we had, one of the bigger issues was always transportation and PennDOT. Is PennDOT going to be part of this conversation? If you're
Yes.
looking for more housing, we had a difficult time. We have a larger road is a corridor road that people utilize outside of a Route 78, and it's difficult to explain to PennDOT just how quickly people travel on that road, how the volume has increased over time, how people are now traveling around in the local neighborhoods to get around. And it just seems to me that PennDOT's always maybe a couple steps behind, where if they were a little bit more looking forward thinking, maybe their metrics need to change, that it could alleviate a lot of problems.
Yeah, so absolutely. I'll give you a discrete example. I'm not at liberty to say where because the governor still needs to announce it. But we just did a deal in one particular county where the main holdback on that deal, which will generate 1,000 new units plus new pads for some other mixed uses, was a deficient intersection and the need to expand roadway infrastructure. Right, so normally you'd offset that to a developer. In this particular case, the financials didn't work if that was offset to a developer. The bulk of it was offset to a developer.
Okay.
And so, in working with PennDOT, the Commonwealth was able to come to the table with $7 million. I was able to call the county commissioners and say, I need you guys to do three. The county commissioners were able to find three on their transportation improvement plan. We combined those two streams together, issued the award letters. And as a result, the project's going to be moving, and it's going to be moving in a way that ensures, to your point, right, the 1,000 new or 1,500 new residents associated with that development are going to be able to seamlessly get in and out of that development from a transportation perspective. So yes, 100%. When it comes to large new developments, or expanding the supply in areas where roadways might have been, might not be able to accommodate that increased supply. Like, yes, we will be working with PennDOT and PennDOT's work process.
Even conversely, with if you're looking at an over 55 type of facility, those people would more than likely rely on public transportation. They're no more needing two cars or anything like that. You would have one car per unit situation and maybe some public transportation. So
Yeah,
I can see the benefits of both. and getting new housing for elderly people, and then transitioning the younger people into the existing housing.
Yep, absolutely.
And thank you, Kathy, for bringing about that. And I never even thought about that, and I never brought it up. So, Morgan, one of the things what Kathy was saying in the unit that we were referring to, it's almost 90 units development, and there was massive issue with the infrastructure, the throughway road, that's there, that people use all the time. But this particular construction would bring, obviously it's going to bring a lot of traffic. If you have almost 90 units going in, it's going to bring traffic to a place where there's nothing existing today. And so the residents demanded that, we should put a signal light or something. And PennDOT said, no, you don't have a traffic to allow a signal light. So that means you need to increase the traffic first before a light can be provisioned. But now the builder is willing to fund that signal light part of the project, but we're not allowed to permit that because PennDOT is saying you don't have enough traffic to warrant that.
It was a
So
state road.
yeah, it's a state road.
So
That sounds odd to me. Because we've done developments, like again, in a past life, I was a county commissioner. And like we did a large, it wasn't a residential, it was an industrial, but truck traffic was going to increase to a particular site. And like there will be a light at that intersection, even though, to the point, there wasn't yet traffic to justify the light. So that sounds odd to me.
I could really understand like traffic flow problems if there are a lot of traffic lights, but in this specific area, there aren't any lights.
Yeah, if
From
that's a
one
concern,
jurisdiction to another, you could go from Fountain Hill to Emmaus, which is a long stretch, and there's not a traffic light in between. And this road passes through where our school districts are. So you would think that PennDOT would be a little bit more proactive in saying, yeah, you know what? More kids, more, walking abilities and things of that nature. Maybe a light is warranted to slow down some of the traffic going through that road, but they didn't seem like it was warranted.
So just a feedback then, Morgan, if you are doing a discussion with PennDOT or the transportation group of people or something to bring up, like, hey, you don't have to necessarily, like our current policies, like as organically your volume increases, you warrant different changes and slow changes and stuff. But if there is a project height change that's going to do an instant lift in something that's forecasted compared to the current reality, I think there is a reason to consider it differently than the organic growth that we typically would see. And then I think PennDOT is not up to speed with the governor's goal at this point from this example, because the governor is saying speed and we gotta accelerate these things. But in our community, obviously, it's like, oh, what is if this is the future, it's not all of the types of infrastructure needed to support the housing. Like the sewer line example, the water example, the school, the public transportation, the safety and all that stuff. We haven't even talked about fire and the police and all that. When you look at all that, it has to be all packaged together, right? The vision has to touch all aspects of local community. And I think, that we feel like certain areas are not fully up to speed.
Sure. Yeah, if you guys want to send me over more info on that particular one, I can
Yeah, Kathy,
see what I can.
if
Yeah.
you have
Sure.
yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And Morgan, I know we're a little over time here. I am going to send you the things that we suggested for amendments. As PSATC perspective, we suggested many amendments to through our annual lobby day to the House representatives. And then so what we'll do is, like, I'll have our lobbyists kind of share copies of those with you.
Yeah,
So
please do.
you understand the vision of local communities or the views of local communities, what's favorable, what's taking away the responsibility of local communities, and then state kind of overrides and all that. So we want to definitely be considerate. We definitely want to support the governor's vision on growth and everything. But at the same time, it's not one size fits all. Let's put it that way. So I think that's what people are trying to talk about primarily.
Yeah.
Before we drop, I wanted to see, do you have off of your head a few grants or something that those are already available today for people to apply for different programs and stuff?
So on the housing front, so a lot of what we're going to do over the next year, candidly, is like in standing up this housing shop is like a lot of our programs right now are geared towards traditional affordable units, units that are affordable to individuals at or below 80% AMI. We'll be looking at tweaking existing programs and spinning up new programs to allow for, workforce housing in addition to that, right? Folks that are 80% to 120, 130% AMI. But today, in terms of what's available, FAIR is going to be your largest, most flexible source of funding at the Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency. That's our state housing trust fund, slowly increasing to, I want to say not this year, but next year we'll hit $100 million per year in available allocations. Super flexible fund. Two, also at PHFA, much smaller fund, but is our community revitalization fund program, which is mixed use development, roughly $4.5 million a year available out of that fund. At DCED, Main Street Matters, we allow for residential construction or conversion applications to come in through that program. The Neighborhood Assistance Program, especially for community groups that are looking at getting involved in the housing space, whether that be additive to supply or whether that be supporting at-risk vulnerable populations. The way that program works is businesses donate to a nonprofit. The nonprofit then expends those dollars on a program of work that is approved by DCED. And the contributing business gets, up to 95% of their donation back in the form of savable tax credits. So those would be, I would say those would be the big ones that are available to the masses. PHFA also oversees, on the affordable side, I'm sure you guys are aware, the 4% and the 9% LIHTC credits. 9% is highly competitive. State gets about $40 million a year. 4% are uncapped, but are dependent on what's called volume cap allocation, which I don't want to get into because it's wildly technical, but we're looking at making those easier to access. But in terms of the big ones are going to be that FAIR program, again, $100 million per year next year. And then Neighborhood Assistance Program at $72 million a year. Main Street Matters at, I want to say we're doing about $15 million a year. And that Community Revitalization Fund program at about $4.5 million a year.
That's impressive. Thank you. Thank you again. Unless there are any other questions, I really want to thank you, Morgan, for spending your time. We definitely will stay in touch with you, and hopefully you take the messages from the local communities and put into work.
Yeah, it was great. Thank you guys for your interest. Seriously, appreciate your partnership on this, and looking forward to working with you and with your sister municipal government organizations as we roll this out over the next few years. So thanks for the time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. This was super informative. Appreciate it.
Bye.
You guys
take care.